Okay, all right, okay, so let's just continue. Chapter 5, right? So So we're in chapter 5, long run. Okay, so this chapter is solely devoted to understanding the long run. So you have to bear in mind that we've been talking about we are talking about the long run in this chapter. So sometimes things seems to be a little bit unintuitive. This is because we're talking about long run. So we're assuming that price is totally flexible. Okay. So this long run trajectory is just supposed to be giving you some idea how the new steady state will look like, and tell you how to guide you how to think about the short term when you're given the long term trajectory. So as I shown last time, the short run. What you expect to happen in the short run will be like a modification of this long run trajectory by assuming that the price is actually sticky in the short run. Okay, so so that's why. So last time I gave you, I suppose I gave you something like this, right? So this jump is assuming the price is totally flexible. But if price is actually sticky in the short run, then you expect that the rise in the interest rate is going to be smooth because the price will have to adjust slowly over time. So again, suppose so what happened to the price level also would be, the price level is going to be adjusting slowly in the short run when price is sticky. So this is the long run trajectory, and it's an asymptotic. It's like an asymptotic path. So this will approach asymptotically to this long run new steady state. So here we're expecting, without going into the detail of the analysis, which may be quite complicated, we sort of expect that to be some overshooting of the exchange rate, and then asymptotically in the long run it's going to approach that long run trajectory. Okay, so just treat this path. These paths are long run paths. They are long run paths. Okay. When we assume that prices are perfectly flexible, okay? So that's that's one thing I want to remind you about. The other thing I want to remind you about is, let me see, what do I want to remind you about? I want to remind you about, oh yeah, there is, I go back to an earlier, so an earlier slide here, maybe I wasn't exactly very clear about this in this slide. This is slide number, I think slide number 15. Okay, so here's the prediction about, this is like the preview of what you will expect to see, but it's useful to revisit these 3 points. So this long run model, if you assume that the price level is perfectly flexible, and you assume that there is long run neutrality of money, right? And then, and also if you believe in PPP, okay, so basically these 3 things, right? So long run neutrality of money, price is perfectly flexible, even in the short run, and PPP holds. Then there are 3 predictions. One is that money supply, a permanent rise in money supply, will cause a proportional increase in the domestic price level, and also a proportional depreciation of domestic currency. The second thing is that the interest rate, a long-run rise in the domestic nominal interest rate due to an increase in the inflation rate is associated with a rise, a rise in domestic prices, and actually faster rate of inflation, and a proportional depreciation of the domestic currency. And in fact, faster depreciation. So this one is, if you come to think about this, is actually quite a different prediction from the model we learned in the last chapter, right? Because in the last chapter we say a increase in interest rate is associated with an appreciation. But this one actually says that an increase in interest rate actually is associated with a depreciation. Okay? So why? Can anybody tell me why? Why is this? Why is there such an apparent contradiction? Do you remember? Do you remember in the last chapter we say, suppose there is a let's say something happened in the money market. Suppose there's a reduction in money supply. It will lead to an increase in interest rate, and that increase in interest rate will actually lead to an appreciation of the currency. You see? You remember that, right? Given that E is unchanged, right? Saying this but here it says that an increase in the interest rate actually is associated with a depreciation of currency. So why? Can anybody tell me why? Can anybody tell me why? So if you cannot answer this question, it means that you're still not in the mode, not really getting into what this chapter is about. Okay, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm just a guess.
Yeah.
So is it because I guess the previous chapter is it a secondary effect?
Secondary?
Yeah, money supply change caused the interest rate to change.
It's a secondary effect. What do you mean by secondary effect?
Yeah, because there is a contradiction. Maybe there is a one effect is larger than another direction's effect. So yeah, I guess a guess.
No. It's not a secondary effect. That one is still. I wish I could give you. I could get back the previous slide, the slide from the previous chapter. This chapter 4, right? We have a chapter 4. Let me see. Let's see, chapter 4, chapter 3, chapter 3. Where is that one? I cannot find. Oh, this is chapter 4. So in this chapter, let me see. In this chapter 4, for some reason, I cannot see. Okay. In this chapter, you remember we have, you see, we have a thought experiment of an yeah. So for example, there is something like that. There is let's say there's a rise in real income that will lead to an increase in interest rate, right? An increase in interest rate would actually, well, here is just the reverse. Here you have here, yeah, a one-time temporary increase in money supply in the U.S. Led to a depreciation, lead to a decrease in the interest rate and a depreciation of the currency, which actually means that if there is an increase, if there's a decrease in money supply, then the interest rate will rise and the exchange rate will appreciate, right? So it's just like that. That's right. So let's say, for example here, look at this. A temporary decrease in country's money supply causes interest rate to rise and the domestic currency to appreciate. Okay, that's the result that we have in the last chapter. Remember? In fact, if we look at the permanent, we also look at the permanent, right? So remember, we have a one-time temporary increase in money supply. That would also lead to a well, without getting into very detail, I think yeah. So I remember we have something. Okay, yeah. So permanent a permanent one-time increase in money supply. Oh, sorry. Will lead to a decrease in the interest rate and a kind of a depreciation of the currency. But if it's the opposite, if it's a permanent decrease in the money supply, then the interest rate would rise, and there would be there would be what? There would be appreciation of the currency. There will be appreciation of currency, right? So now, in this case, in other words, increase in interest rate will be associated with an appreciation of the currency, right? Right. But in this here, we say an increase in interest rate is associated with a depreciation of currency. So what's happening? Why is there such a contradictory kind of conclusion? Yeah.
I think of another guess. Is it based because the two chapters based on different purchasing power parity?
The what?
Different purchasing power parity. Because I guess here you use the monetary approach for the long run, and it is based on the exchange rate equals to the P over P star. So this is based on the absolute purchasing power parity.
Yeah.
The formula.
Yeah.
And I guess the chapter 4.1, maybe you use the relative parity, relative purchasing power parity.
In fact, in chapter 4, we still somehow rely on some idea of the purchasing power parity, because do you remember I say the reason why the EE changes is really because the people expect in the long run long-run neutrality of money, right? Long-run neutrality of money means that the real variables will not be a factor in the long run. And real variable, one of the real variables is the relative price of home good to that of foreign good. So in order for that to be unchanged in the long run exchange rate must rise by the same percentage as the increase in money supply, right? Because the price level, because in the long run, let's say there's a 10% increase in money supply, permanent 10% increase in money supply at home, that will lead, in the long run, lead to a 10% increase in the price level at home, which in turn should lead to a 10% depreciation of the currency in the long run because of long run neutrality of money. In the long run, real variable should not, this relative price of home good to foreign good should be unchanged in the long run, right? That explains, that is why we say this long run E should rise by 10% as the same rate of increase in money supply. So we do rely on the PPP idea, right? The PPP idea being that the purchasing power of the dollar just remains the same. The relative price of home good to foreign good remains the same. That is purchasing power parity. Okay? Does it make sense? Does it make sense that I say the relative price of home good to that of foreign good remains unchanged in the long run is an application of purchasing power parity? Does it make sense? I want to make sure that you understand that this makes sense. This is an application. Do you see that? This is an application of PPP. Because the relative price, the application of, I should say, the application of relative PPP, not the absolute, but the relative. So relative PPP basically means that the relative price of home good to foreign good stays unchanged. That's relative PPP. So okay, let's come back to absolute PPP versus relative PPP. What is absolute PPP? What is absolute PPP? And what is absolute PPP?
Average price of domestic goods over the average price of foreign goods, right?
So E is equal to
The average price of the domestic goods.
okay, P over P star. That's absolute PPP. Right? So it says that the way to think about absolute PPP is that you pretend that the two countries are their consumption bundle is exactly the same. So these are, think of this as consumer price indices. The baskets in the two countries are exactly the same. Just pretend that that is true. Okay, and therefore, if that is true, then absolute PPP basically is a consequence of law of one price, given that the consumption baskets of the two countries are exactly the same, right? So law of one price implies absolute PPP if the consumption baskets of the two countries are the same. Does that make sense? Now, so, but what is relative PVP? Relative PVP says the change of these things. So, in fact, what it basically says that the percentage change on the left-hand side is equal to percentage change on the right-hand side. So that's relative PVP. So what it means is that this is not equal anymore, but in fact, what it means is that E is a constant multiplied by P over P star. It's just, right? Make sense? If this is a constant, then the percentage change of that, equal to percentage change of that will imply this thing, right? So in other words, see the difference here? Absolute PVP and relative PVP, the difference is that this is a constant. In this case, the constant is equal to 1. In this case, it can be any constant. So this is more general. This is weaker. This is a weaker condition than this one, because it can be any constant, any positive constant. Okay. Now it turns out that this constant is the relative price of home good to foreign good. Okay, and that later on we'll define this to be the real exchange rate, actually, right? Eventually, this will be the real exchange rate, Q. We call it Q. Okay, so coming back to the question about why did I talk about this? Because I was asking that in chapter 4 we actually made use of the idea of relative PPP when we try to determine what is the EE. You see, when we try to determine what is the EE, we actually make use of that idea. Okay, that EE right, it's here. So the reason why this curve shifts to the right, we're talking about a one-time increase, permanent increase in money supply of the U.S., right? So this curve shifts to the right because EE increases. Why EE increases is because the long run E will rise. The reason why long run E rises is because the relative price of home good to foreign good should remain unchanged in the long run in the face of a pure monetary shock, because monetary neutrality in the long run. In the long run, money should be neutral, and therefore the relative price of home good to foreign good should remain unchanged. Okay, so that is so. Let me see here. Yeah, so. Yeah, so this is what we assume here, right? So then later on we have this. So the idea here is that price level will increase by the same percentage at home in the long run. E will rise by the same percentage as the increase in money supply in the long run, and this explains why we have a proportional long run depreciation of a currency. Okay, so that's why we have this. Okay, so if you have forgotten about this, you better go back to try to understand why, right? So we have used okay. So let's just not worry about this one now. Let's talk about this one. So again, I come back to my question. What is this? Why is there an apparent contradiction? Yeah.
I think maybe it's because in chapter 5 we talk about the nominal interest rate instead of real interest rate. Because the interest rate increase is because of the increase of inflation rate. So actually the real interest rate didn't really change. But the inflation rate become higher is because of the more money supply. So actually it's just like increase the money supply and didn't change the real money supply.
You pointed out something that's close to what I was looking for. It is here you're saying that the cause of the increase in nominal interest rate is because of inflation. So the nominal interest rate rises, but why does it rise? The cause of its rise is because of higher inflation. But in the previous case, the cause of a rise in interest rate was not because of inflation. It was caused by something else. It was caused by the money, for example, a permanent decrease in money supply, or a permanent increase in income, for example, right? So the cause, what caused the interest rate to change actually matters a lot, okay? So in this case, it's caused by inflation. And then the inflation was caused by the increase in growth rate of money supply, for example. Okay, increase in growth rate of money supply to increase in inflation. In the long run, remember we're talking about long run actually, the permanent one-time increase in the rate of growth of money supply increase the rate of inflation in the long run, okay? And therefore, it increases the nominal interest rate in the long run. Because the real interest rate is unchanged. Long run neutrality of money, remember, right? In the long run, the real interest rate is going to be unchanged in this long run model. And therefore, this, because of Fisher effect says if you less increase in long run increase in rate of inflation lead to a long run increase in nominal interest rate. So the domestic nominal interest rate increases because of the Fisher effect, but that, because the cause is because of the increasing rate of growth of money, therefore it leads to a depreciation. So the cause, so when we say there's some relationship between two variables, we have to make sure what is the cause of the change. Okay, when we say, you know, there's when variable A increases, it will lead to an increase in variable B. Before you answer that question, because before you make that statement, you have to state clearly what caused variable A to increase. Okay, if the cause that A increases is different, then the relationship between A and B can be different, can be just opposite in sign in this particular case. Okay, so the cause of an increase in nominal interest rate is different, therefore it's different. And this is also a long-run model as well. We assume that price is totally flexible. Oh, sorry. Okay, so well, I'll put this again. The third kind of prediction of from this monetary approach model is that a long-run rise in the domestic income would cause a proportional appreciation of the currency. Now this is consistent. This is similar result as in the last chapter. So there's no contradiction or apparent contradiction here. Okay. So all right. So now let me go back then to. So after I clarify this. I just go back. Do you have any questions so far? Last time we were talking about, we more or less have finished the monetary approach, up to here, okay? And then we talk about the shortcomings of PVP, right? So there's little empirical support of absolute purchasing power parity, which you should not be very surprised, right? Because first of all, the baskets usually are very different. If you look at the data, the baskets are different across countries. Relative PVP is more consistent data, but also perform poorly, right? So last time I used this diagram, right? So, so this is the yen-dollar exchange rate and the relative Japan-US price level. So the red curve is the relative Japan to US price level. The blue curve is the yen-dollar exchange rate. If absolute PVP holds, then the two curves should overlap. Obviously, they don't overlap. But what about relative PVP? Relative PVP will say, okay, that if you start from that point, their slope should be the same. In other words, you know, in some sense, after many years, you know, when you get back to this point, you know, from 1980 all the way back to around 2000, 2002, then you have the relative PVP holding, you know. But how many years are we talking about here? 20 years, okay? So after 20 years, the relative PVP holds. That's a long time. It's really long. So in other words, unless you are willing to wait for a long time, even relative PVP does not hold, you see, all right? So what explains can anybody tell me why PVP doesn't hold? What are the factors? What are the possible factors that PVP doesn't hold? Well, you can even relative PVP. So can anybody tell me even relative PVP doesn't hold? Why is it that even relative PVP doesn't hold? Well, some of them I already told you. Is the two countries have two different consumption baskets. Right? That's an obvious answer, but there is also other factors. So can anybody tell me one more? Yeah? Trade barriers. Yeah, so actually we already talked about this, right? So we talked about things like Big Mac. You know, it's the trade barrier in Big Mac is really large. People cannot really arbitrage Big Macs. It's perishable. And all that. The transport cost is high and all that. So now that's a very important implication here, because trade costs means not just that some goods are not arbitrageable. They're not. It's not possible to arbitrage certain goods, but there are certain things, especially services, that are almost like totally non-tradable. So there are a lot of tradable and there are a lot of non-tradable goods. Okay, so we should distinguish between tradable goods and non-tradable goods, actually. So it's actually very important to understand that there are a lot of goods that are actually non-tradable. Okay, especially services, right? So for example, medical services. You go to see a doctor, right? Or a good example is a haircut. We often use that example, haircut, right? All these services, right? Gas, you try to get gasoline for your car. I mean, a lot of all these services are really non-tradable. So in other words, the transport costs the trade costs of these things, of services, are almost infinite. It's infinite trade costs for services. Services have infinite trade costs. So that's why because of that, you can easily visualize why law of one price or even relative PV may not hold, right? In particular, absolute PV does not hold. That makes a lot of sense. Another, can you give me another example? Other reason why the PVV doesn't hold? That's a transport cost or trade cost. Okay, trade cost. Any other reason? So we've been assuming like perfect competition, right? Or at least unconsciously you are assuming that. We're assuming perfect competition, meaning that the price of good is same as the cost, more or less. But suppose we're not talking about perfect competition. If it's in perfect competition, then the firm that sells goods to many countries may set different prices in different countries based on the elasticity of demand in these countries. So that may also lead to difference in the prices of the same goods across countries, right? So how about the third? Can you give me a third reason? Oh, I've already given you the third reason. The baskets are different. So okay, so these are right. Okay, so three things: trade barriers, right? We talk about that. Imperfect competition, difference in basket use. Three things. So services are often not tradable, and also you have policy barriers, transport barriers, right? Tradable versus non-tradable is a very important concept. So imperfect competition, right? Pricing to markets. Cost is not equal to price anymore, and the price may depend on the elasticity of demand in a country. That's why we call pricing to market, price discrimination. Third one, we already talked about the baskets. They have different baskets. Okay, these three reasons. I think the first reason is the most important reason, is that you have tradable goods versus non-tradable goods. That's a very important thing. So we have already seen this law of one price. So there's no. Now here is actually quite interesting. You see the law of one price obviously doesn't hold for Big Mac, right? In other words, this kind of formula will not hold. But I'm wondering whether the relative, in the relative sense, whether it holds or not. So in other words, I'm wondering whether the relative price is actually constant over time. I don't know whether that if you have time, you can go home and do some research for me. Over time, the relative price of Big Mac across countries, are they constant or not? Okay, the relative price, obviously, not over time. You just look at it; they're different. They're all very different. In Hong Kong, one Big Mac costs $2.19 US. In the US, it costs 4.37. But this 4.37 divided by 2.19 is approximately 2, right? So in other words, a Big Mac costs twice as much in the US than in Hong Kong, okay? I want to know, this is what, 2013, right? Can you look up 2019 and tell me what's the ratio? Are they continue to be equal to 2? Or is it continue to be equal to 2 or larger than 2, smaller than 2? That would be interesting, because that will tell us something about the relative thing, you see? Whether that relative price is constant over time, okay? So that's one thing, okay? Let me see here, okay, so well, we already said that we're not very surprised. Now, okay. In order to understand this, we need to introduce the concept of real exchange rate. Okay, so now is time to talk about the real exchange rate. Okay, this real exchange rate is really about the relative price of goods. Okay, so here let's talk about. Let's see here. Okay, what is this? Each point represents one country. This is the year, let's see here, 2005, okay, 2010. For the year 2010, the vertical axis is the price level relative to the US, and the horizontal axis is the real per capita income. So horizontal axis tells you how rich is the country. How rich is the country? Vertical axis tells you the price level of the basket. Okay. Well, for good comparison, we have to assume that the baskets are the same. Okay. Of course, we know that they are not the same, but let's assume that the baskets are approximately the same. Okay. Otherwise, you cannot compare. I mean, if you're comparing apple with orange, you cannot really say much, right? But let's say, suppose we pretend that we're comparing apple with apple. Okay. That the baskets are the same. Okay, assume that across all countries the baskets are the same. Okay, and in fact, researchers have tried to adjust these baskets so as to make them as comparable as possible. So this has been adjusted so that the baskets are sort of as close to each other as possible. Now you see that each point represents one country, right? So you run a regression, and you said when the richer country, the price level is higher for the same basket. Okay. Well, of course, this price is all converted into US dollar terms, right? So richer country, the price level in richer countries are higher. Things are more expensive in the richer country, which is what you would expect, right? You go to U.S., you find that goods are more expensive in the U.S. compared with let's say China or Indonesia, right? Because U.S. is a richer country. You go to Germany, same thing, right? Germany, things are more expensive in Germany compared with Indonesia or Malaysia, right? Or Mexico, okay? So same thing, the same good. We're talking about the same good, right? So that actually already says that the law of one price doesn't hold, and also the in a sense, absolute PVB doesn't hold, right? If it holds, then it should be a horizontal line, right? It should be a horizontal line if absolute PVB holds, right? Because the price level, because you just multiply the, so what absolute PVB says is that the same basket, then the prices should be the same across all countries. So now how do you explain this? How do you explain this? So we have to say that, okay, the last time shows that the price levels expressed in US dollar of the same basket of goods and services are substantially different across countries, okay? Absolute PVB does not hold in the long run. This is a long run thing, right? So this, people begin to think about this. In fact, is attributed to, this line of thinking is attributed to two economists, Balazar. There's an economist called Balazar, and the other is Paul Samuelson. So these two economists, they together try to investigate this issue, okay? Why price level is higher in richer country, okay? So one clue they get is that the non-tradables tend to be more expensive in the rich countries. So they find that the main reason why in richer countries price level is higher is because non-tradables are more expensive in the richer country. So what do you mean by that? So for example, a haircut. So if you compare the price of a haircut in Indonesia with the price of a haircut in the US, you find that the price of a haircut in the US is much, much higher. Okay, now in the US, to get a haircut, you probably pay $20 US or something like that, right? In Indonesia, it's much, much cheaper. I don't know how much, maybe $2 US, $3 US. So the services are much cheaper. The non-tradables are much cheaper in developing countries. So why? Because a lot of these services are actually require just labor to produce. Think of a massage, okay? A massager in Indonesia and a massager in the US, they're equally productive, almost equally productive, right? But they charge a much higher price in the US, right? The same massage. Of course, that's because the wage is higher in the US. Okay, same person moving from Indonesia to the US earns a lot higher wage. The productivity is the same, but the wage is much higher. So one thing is that the other element, therefore, is the wage difference in the two countries, in the richer country. So richer countries have much higher wage than poorer countries. Okay, so we take that as a fact, right? That's a fact. We don't try to explain why. In fact, you can explain why they're higher wage, but we don't need to. So the theory is that the labor forces of poor countries are less productive than those of rich countries in the tradable sector, but that they are more or less as productive as the rich countries in the non-tradable sectors. Right? So once you kind of realize that, and then coupled with the fact that wage is higher in a richer country. Okay, wage is high in the richer country. Then you can see why price level is higher in the richer country. Because the tradable goods prices are more or less the same across countries. Okay, so a Boeing is as expensive in Indonesia as in the US. They're just the same price. Okay. The tradable, an iPhone in Indonesia is just as expensive as an iPhone in the US. All these tradable goods are just same price across country. More or less the same price, tradables. Okay, a lot of these tradables are manufacturing goods, but the non-tradables on the other hand is cheaper in the developing countries, and also developing countries are lower wage. So these two together will lead to the conclusion that prices are lower in the developing countries. Okay, so this theory helps us to sort of introduce the idea of non-tradables versus tradable. So that is a core when people talk about this idea of real interest rate and real exchange rate. They oftentimes have to invoke this idea of tradables versus non-tradable. Okay, so the existence of non-tradables cause poor countries have lower price indices than the poor have lower wages, right? The reason why they have lower wages is they have lower labor productivity when averaging over both tradables and non-tradables. They have lower productivity, therefore have lower wage. So the price indices of tradable goods are equal in the rich and poor countries. Okay, as I just said, So the rich countries' relative productivity of non-tradables to tradable is lower than that of poor countries, right? So, so rich country is a lot more productive in the tradable goods. For example, the machines, right? All the manufactured goods, the rich countries are a lot more productive. But for the non-tradables, as I just said, for the massage, or haircut, or whatever, that kind of, a lot of services that are very labor intensive. And in that area, the developing countries are almost as productive as the developed countries. Okay? So we can immediately conclude that the poor countries have lower overall price level. Okay? Now here I did not write down a mathematical model. I would imagine it will be, again, a good midterm exam question if I ask you, just to write down, mathematical relationship and explain why this is true. Okay, so you can go on and think about how to write down a mathematical model to just capture all what I just said here. Okay. Okay, does that make sense? Is there any questions? So here the idea is that absolute PVP does not hold. It's a fact. It is a fact. Now, given that absolute PVP does not hold, then what it means is that this thing, this divided by this is not equal to 1, right? So this divided by this is not equal to 1, E divided by P over P star is not equal to 1. Because that is not a horizontal line. But what is this thing? This thing is in fact the relative price. Okay? The relative, this left-hand side is the relative price of goods. And we define it as real exchange rate. Real exchange rate is the relative price across countries. Okay, so we try to generalize the monetary approach to PVP to make a better theory, and so we define something called real exchange rate. It's the rate of exchange for goods and services across countries. It's the relative price of goods and services across countries. Okay. So here, it is the dollar price of a European group of goods and services relative to the dollar price of an American group of goods and services. So it is defined this way. Okay. So so in other words, if I can rewrite this, I can rewrite. So basically, E is equal to Q times P over P star. Okay, when P is home, right? So let's say US is home. US is home. Then you can immediately see that this is the real exchange rate. Real exchange rate is the if it is higher than the real exchange rate depreciates. Okay, higher Q means that the real exchange rate depreciates, which means that when this is higher, when Q is higher, means that the relative price of home good is lower. Okay, the relative price of home good is lower if this is higher. Okay, the relative price, okay, real exchange rate. So okay. So what's the intuition of this real exchange rate, by the way? Well, it tells you how expensive is home good relative to foreign goods. So if Q is higher, as I said, there's a real depreciation, right? Real depreciation, Q is higher, real depreciation. What does it mean intuitively? Well, home goods is cheaper relative to foreign goods. Okay? If Q is higher, home good is cheaper relative to foreign good. Foreign good is more expensive relative to home good. Do you want to go sightseeing if Q is higher? Maybe you want to delay your sightseeing plan if Q is higher, because foreign goods are more expensive now. So when people say, oh, euro, when the US dollar appreciate relative to euro, it's good for Hong Kong people to go to Europe to visit, because euro is cheaper. The goods in Europe is cheaper. The real exchange rate of Hong Kong dollar has appreciated. Therefore, it's good to go sightseeing in a foreign country. So what it means is real exchange rate capture how expensive are foreign goods. If foreign goods are cheaper, if the real exchange rate is lower, if there's a real appreciation of your currency, foreign goods are cheaper, and therefore you have more incentive to buy foreign goods. You have more incentive to go to visit the foreign country, or you have more incentive to import. Okay, import will be encouraged when real exchange rate appreciate, but export will be discouraged because your good become more expensive to foreigners. Foreigners have less incentive to buy your goods. So export will be discouraged, import will be encouraged if there's a real appreciation. Okay. So it's really real exchange rate that is here. Okay. Does it matter? Does it make sense? Okay. So it's the real exchange rate. Right. So Q. So this is just a rewrite of this equation. Okay, you rewrite it. So Q is equal to E P star divided by P. Okay, P star is foreign, P is home. Okay. So if the yield basket costs 100 euro, US basket costs $120, and nominal exchange rate is $1.2 per euro, okay? Then the real exchange rate is just 1 US basket per EU basket. So real exchange rate is expressed as, how many home basket per foreign basket. That's the real exchange rate. Okay, so let's ask this question: a real depreciation of value of U.S. products means a what in the dollar's purchasing power of EU products relative to the dollar's purchasing power of U.S. products? What do you think? A real depreciation means a what? What is that blank? Right. So what is this blank? Just tell me. Yeah, you're close, but just tell me what is that blank? A decrease in dollars purchasing power. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Decrease in dollars. Yeah. Okay. So this implies that U.S. goods becomes less what relative to EU goods? Expensive. Less expensive. It's very easy actually. This implies that the value of U.S. goods relative to value of EU goods. What? Falls, right? It falls. So basically, a real depreciation means that your goods are cheaper. Okay. because remember how many US basket per EU basket, that's the real exchange rate. So a real appreciation of the value of US products means a what? An increase in a dollar's purchasing power. This implies US goods become more expensive, right? Relative to EU goods. This implies that the value of US goods relative to the value of EU goods increase. Right. So, yeah. All right. Okay. So according to PVP, exchange rate are determined by this, right? By this. According to the more general real exchange rate approach, it would be like this. Okay. So this is a kind of see here. This actually tells you what? According to a more general real exchange rate approach, exchange rate may also be influenced by a real exchange rate. So this actually tells you that, okay, we are modifying the absolute PVP. That's absolute PVP. But we're modifying it and say, okay, there is maybe one more thing that will affect the nominal exchange rate, and that thing is the real exchange rate. Okay. All right. So the absolute PVP says that the nominal exchange rate is purely determined by the home price divided by the foreign price. But the more general approach says that the nominal exchange rate is determined not just by the relative home price to foreign price, but also affected by this real exchange rate. But then the next question to ask is, what determines this guy? Okay, that is very important. What determines this guy is very important. Otherwise, you need to have a theory to explain what this guy is affected. How this is affected. So what influences the real exchange rate? That's the next question, right? So the Balassa-Samuelson theory is this is the Balassa-Samuelson theory. It's one theory that tries to explain the determination of real exchange rate. Okay, it's one theory. They say that the reason why the real exchange rate in poorer country is lower is because of the tradable versus non-tradable productivity. Okay, try to explain why the real exchange rate of poorer countries are lower than those of richer countries, say relative to the US dollar. Okay, so this is what they do. But another theory of the determination of long-run real exchange rate is given in the next few slides. So, which is, well, basically what this the authors of the textbook obviously favor their approach. Okay, so remember we talk about long run. Okay, we're still talking about the long run. Okay, remember. So the idea is that the long run real exchange rate is determined by the real side of the economy. That makes sense, right? So in the long run, is a real, what is real exchange rate is the relative price, right? Relative price this should be determined by real side of the economy. So what's the real side of the economy here we talk about? Well, in this course we did not cover international trade, but in fact the authors have written the textbook itself actually has an earlier part which we did not cover. In the earlier part of the textbook, there's a part which is concerned with international trade. So in international trade, the relative price, according to some very standard international trade theory, the relative price of goods across countries is determined by comparative advantage is determined by relative relative productivity versus relative demand for goods. So this is how this model is presented here. So how the real side of the economy is something like that. Okay, this is something that new. This is totally new. So that's why I think it needs a little bit more explanation here. Okay. So the vertical axis is the real exchange rate. Okay. The relative price of goods across countries. Suppose we have two countries. One is the U.S. and the other is EU. U.S. is home. EU is foreign. Here's say, okay, this red vertical curve is called relative supply curve. It basically it's the real output of home divided by real output of foreign. Okay, so relative is like a relative real output, relative real output of home. Okay, and then the green, the blue curve is called relative demand curve. It tells you the relative demand, the world's relative demand for home produced goods. Okay, all these are real terms. So first of all, why is this vertical? Why is the red curve vertical? Can you tell me why the red curve is vertical? If the relative supply is basically is the real GDP in the U.S. divided by real GDP in EU in the long run. Why is the red curve vertical? Tell me why? Yeah.
Because we assume that the technology is going to be the same for both, so the output shouldn't change. Is it a constant?
Well, technology, we don't have to assume that they are the same. We should not actually. There's no need to assume that they have the same technology. But you point out technology. That's actually important. So basically, we just assume that they have different technologies. The two countries have different technology, but the real output, the long run real output of an economy is determined by the technology of that country, together with all the factors of the supply of the vector production, such as labor supply, supply of land, supply of capital. So all these factors apply together with the technology of the country will determine the long run real output of the country. Does it make sense? Makes sense, right? Because this is the productive capacity of the country, and in the long run should be determined by this. Why we say that in the long run? Because in the short run there may be some business cycle effects, and we don't care about that kind of short run effect. We only care about the long run. Remember. So in the short run, business cycle may cause the country's real output to fluctuate based on business cycles. But in the long run, there's no business cycle effect. It's purely determined by technology and the factors applied. Does it make sense? Right. So while the two countries have a different technology, they have different factors applied, so they can have different real output. But that is totally. But why is it vertical? It's vertical because it's supposed to be independent of the real exchange rate. Yeah.
But then wouldn't the real exchange rate make exports and imports cheaper or more expensive?
Yeah.
That would also affect the
it doesn't affect the supply. Purely talking about the supply. Okay, you have to be very careful to separate the supply side from the demand side. Okay, so the supply side is not affected by this kind of thing that you just mentioned. Right? So you're saying that you're saying that you can import some intermediate goods more cheaply so that you will increase your GDP or something, your real output. Are you saying something like that? It's an interesting question here. Your real exchange rate. Okay, this is we when you import foreign intermediate goods, I need to think about it. I never sort of thought about this possibility. So I always think that I see. So yeah, this is good. I have to think about it more carefully. But by and large, I would say the dominant effect is still your factor supplies and your technology. You may be able to import some foreign goods, maybe foreign intermediate goods for your production, or you may even say you can hire foreign labor, okay, to work for you. But that would be, I would say that's a secondary. I would say is secondary. The dominant effect is still your own supply of labor, of factors production, and your own technology. Okay. So that's why we sort of assume that this is a vertical curve. Now the green curve, I mean the blue curve, needs some explanation. The RD curve, the relative demand curve, is the global relative demand. You have to remember, it's global. It's the demand for demand for home goods relative to demand for home produced goods relative to foreign produced goods. Okay, demand for home produced goods relative to foreign produced goods. Okay. So if the real exchange rate is higher, that means that it's a real depreciation. If there's a real depreciation of the home currency, that means that home good becomes cheaper when Q is larger. Then there's higher demand for home produced goods. Makes sense, right? Because we just said that if you have a real depreciation, then then your good becomes cheaper to foreigners, and foreign goods become more expensive to you. So these two effects together means that the demand for home produced goods will increase when Q rises. Does it make sense, right? So that's why. So you have a equilibrium right there. That will determine the long run real exchange rate. Now suppose you have some shift. You shift. Assume there's a okay. So here is something that there is. We have to assume that there is a home bias in the consumption. Okay. in the consumption of. So what it means is that home consumers tend to consume a larger share of home-produced goods in their total consumption expenditure than foreign consumers do. Why do we have to assume that? The reason is because, see, this Q is, strictly speaking, this Q refers to the consumer price index. See, these are consumer price index. They are not the price of the home produced goods. See, there's a distinction between the price of consumer goods and the price of the goods produced by home. Okay, so so let me. I hope I have my thing here. Okay. Okay, I still have a little bit of time, so let me try to show you this. Right, okay, so let me see. I think this is right, okay. So here's what I want to tell you. So by that definition, that Q is equal to that thing. It's just like this here, right? It's the relative price of a European consumption bundle to that of an American consumption bundle, right? And PEU and PUS are the consumer price index of Europe and US respectively. So we write this to this, right? So in simplified notation by just like that. But we assume that there is a home bias in consumption. Then the relative price of a European consumption bundle to that of an American consumption bundle is positively related to the relative price of European production bundle to that of American production bundle. This is actually a very important assumption because we want to say that this Q is positively related to this Q prime. You see? Because we, because that curve, strictly speaking, this green curve, strictly speaking, is relating the relative price of home-produced goods to foreign-produced goods. Okay, is not the same as the relative price of home consumption good relative to relative to foreign consumption good. You see what I'm saying? So that's why that we need to make this assumption of home bias in consumption. So in other words, the fact that we have Q equal to this guy, but then we define something called Q prime, which is the relative price of foreign produced good to that of home produced good, right? So this is the price index of good produced in Europe. This is the price index of good produced by the US. You see the difference? This is the consumer price index of Europe. This is the producer price index. This is the consumer price index in the US. This is the producer price index in the US. And we're saying that because of home bias in consumption, these two things are positively related. When one increases, the other also increases. So we have to make that assumption. Once we make that assumption, then we can if one treats the variable on the vertical axis of that diagram as Q prime, then the diagram is similar to the Ricardian model, which we have not talked about. in the international trade part. So the Ricardian model will tell you the relation. This RD curve is the relative demand for home producers to that of foreign producers. Okay, so the model, strictly speaking, okay, this. So what I want to say before we leave is that this green curve, this blue curve, strictly speaking, is relating the vertical axis should be the relative price of home produced goods to foreign produced goods. Okay. But since the Q and Q prime are positively correlated, we just treat them as sort of the similar effect occurs. Okay, so I think I should stop here. I think I actually have posted this on campus. Okay, it's already on campus, so you should be able to download this. Any questions? Okay, so I'll see you on Thursday. There will be tutorial next week, but not this week.